Good morning, friends. I'm Yuri Lutsenko, and today we're talking about United Nations. Everybody's obviously aware of the appalling facts that we have now about the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant and all these communications by the Russian delegation in the UN on accusing Ukrainian party, refusing to move away from the station, refusing demilitarization of the nuclear power station. But this is basically a problem which is much, much deeper. This is the result of some major injustice that happened many, many years ago. And actually, today we would like to talk about the role of Russia in the Russian Federation in the United Nations, and we would like to talk about it with the person who probably knows the best, Igor Kharchenko, a very, very prominent Ukrainian diplomat, formerly the right hand of the patriarch of Ukrainian diplomacy, Mr. Dovichenko, who worked at the United Nations for many, many years, and ambassadors to many countries, including Japan and Romania, Igor Kharchenko. Igor, and by the way, we're old friends. We know each other for many, many, many years. Igor, today we would like to probably discuss three blocks of issues. First would be the situation on the replacement, so-called replacement of the Soviet Union at the United Nations. And I would probably split this conversation into, again, two parts. One would be, as we previously discussed, sort of your intellectual observations about these things. And then probably the next set of questions that we'll discuss, maybe not in this particular topic, but a little later, we'll discuss the actual documentary evidence of what happened in 1945, what happened in 1991. But we would probably start indeed with your personal observations on the issue. So basically, what did you see, what do you know, and what do you think about the movement that is gathering momentum in Ukraine, about trying to prove that Russia occupies the seat at the United Nations basically illegally? I mean, that's a line of argument that is used both by Mr. Kislitsa, Ukrainian representatives in the UN, and a number of initiative groups in Ukraine, but this is not an issue that is sort of widely discussed in the West. So, Igor, your observations and ideas and sort of intellectual background on this.
Thank you, Yuri, for a good introduction. It's good to see you healthy and still kicking. You know, it's about time that we all start kicking, and probably kicking as loud as we can in our capacity. It's good that the UN matters are coming more and more of interest for not only bureaucrats and staffers, but also for wider public. Because as you rightly pointed out, now the matters which are being considered specifically at the Security Council of the United Nations, actually the office next to mine, when I was working back in the mid-90s in the United Nations. These matters matter not only for the members of United Nations staff per se or governments, they matter for ordinary people. You mentioned the Zaporizhia power plant, and you mentioned the situation which occurred a couple of days ago in the Security Council when the terrorist state now occupying the seat of the former Soviet Union is using the blackmailing language, which some people can construe as the nuclear terrorism, not obeying the rules. Now, observations, you asked. What happened? Why had we arrived at this juncture in the world development when the body, universal, the only universal body in this world responsible by statute, by the charter, for holding international peace and security is incapable of doing so. The United Nations is now the object of severe criticism in not only Ukraine, but in many quarters around the world. What happened? Why is it so? Why the organization which solemnly proclaimed that in the preamble for the Charter of the United Nations, that the principal goal of this institution is to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. That's first and second line of the preamble of the United Nations Charter. What do we have here today in Ukraine? We have the permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, the primary international body responsible for securing peace on the planet, delivering nuclear terrorism. How come? What can be done? I mean, you don't need any more arguments for wider public to feel that some things went wrong within the United Nations. I think I may have a hint of what kind of answer we may have to this. I think my observation would be that something is rotten inside the composition of the Security Council. And this is the membership of one specific country to which our representative at the United Nations is referring. Recently, I watched several occasions of Security Council meetings recent weeks, and I like the formula Ambassador Kislitsa is using, the representative of the country occupying the seat of the former Soviet Union. That is exactly legally, I think, what we are having now. And I think it is now a matter of not only the Ukrainian delegation, but primarily the delegations of the Security Council members, specifically permanent, to look deeper into the issue and to find the way to bring United Nations rules and procedures back to basics and to find out what can be done and what should be done, both legally and politically, to deprive the terrorist state from the seat in the United Nations Security Council. That would be my preliminary observations of the matter.
Thank you, Igor. We would like to discuss now, because I guess you were already a diplomat when all of these things were happening, and when you were already working at the UN, this was a very, very non-distant past. So now we are having a major discourse in Ukraine, basically saying that the Russian Federation is occupying the seat at the United Nations illegally. Because the story, and I'm sure we'll have another broadcast when we will discuss all the documents, details, and so on and so forth. But basically, the line, if we put it in a common language without going into deep legalistic issues, the line is this, in my opinion. Russian Federation has obtained the Soviet Union seat by fraud. By very basic fraud. Okay? And what do we do about it? I mean, as far as it's obvious pretty much for everybody that when the Soviet Union was collapsing, Mr. Yeltsin, and then the president of Russia, just submitted a letter, which is, to my opinion, and I'm truly curious in your opinion as international diplomat, to my opinion, it was just a piece of paper saying that, oh, now we are Russia, we're occupying the seat of the Soviet Union. Okay, that's one thing, or one sort of topic for discussion, and the other topic for discussion, and again, we're now just sort of doing a bit of a ping pong of our future topics for communication. And the second thing is that apart from occupying the seat, that the other sort of twisted logic of Russia is that they're trying to say that they just took over, Russian debts, blah blah blah. But that's not the point. The true point of the story is that Soviet Union, Russia was never a successor in a legal way of the Soviet Union, because Russia was a self-proclaimed successor. But again, in my humble, non-professional opinion, Russia just never fulfilled any requirements, because Soviet Union did not magically transform itself into Russia. It was dissolved. So Russia had to go through procedures and apply for a seat at the United Nations. So these are two sort of things that I would like to, explore with you. A, this what I call fraud, or you can call it whatever. And second, the fact that Russia actually never, in any point of view, neither legalistic, nor just the common sense, Russia was never a member of the United Nations. So let's discuss these 2 points.
Well, Yuri, I understand the direction of the topic you just offered. I will not be using probably the term fraud for 1991. Russian Federation jumped in. No. Let me finish. I think as in most common occasions in the history of the former Soviet Union and the current Russian Federation, we may talk rather about the professional negligence, which created what normal lawyers would call a procedural failure to secure the right way of obtaining the seat of the former Soviet Union in the United Nations Security Council. Because what we have today, going back to history of 30 years from now, Soviet Union was collapsing. There were a number of issues to decide by the constituent newly independent states, which they did. The biggest thing was, of course, the creation of the so-called the Commonwealth of Independent States, which is the loose sort of organization which would resemble something of, I don't know, the closest similar, like by the name, Commonwealth, British Commonwealth, right? But problem is, for Ukraine, Ukraine had never ratified the Charter of the Commonwealth of Independent States. So for 30 years, for more than 20 years, Ukraine was playing as if it was a member of the Commonwealth of Independent States. But de jure, legally, we never have been a member of the Commonwealth of Independent States. And one of the issues which had been decided at that time, in 91, was, upon the insistence of the Russian Federation, the issue of the successorship, so-called, but the correct word which was used, if I remember, in 1991, upon the insistence of the Russian Federation, was the continuator. The lawyers should look into the depth of the differences of these two terms, successor and continuator. And in 1991 in Almaty, Kazakhstan, the declaration was agreed by the future members of the Commonwealth of Independent States that Russia may go forward as a continuator of the former Soviet Union in the United Nations, including in the Security Council. Legal problem, we have two, I think. First, I mentioned already, the bulk of issues which had been decided at that time with the collapse of the Soviet Union to arrange the legal and other divorce matters included that issue. But, bottom line, Ukraine had never ratified the charter. Ukraine had never been a member, legally, of the Commonwealth of Independent States. So that voice could, with good legal in-depth looking at, can be always withdrawn. Second, the procedural matter within the United Nations. And here I'm making the reference to what our representative, Mr. Kislitsa, had mentioned several times. Russian Federation had never went through the normal legal procedure to get the seat of the former Soviet Union. So on that side of the matter, it is the issue for the United Nations lawyers to look at the matter and to find out how come it's for 30 years we have, well, now I may use a political term, a gangster sitting in the permanent seat of the United Nations Security Council member. So, both legally and politically, that's a huge matter. And once again, tracing back to the first topic in our discussion with this Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, it's now visible not only for professionals, journalists, those who are interested in politics, it's visible for practically everyone. And it happens just in front of our eyes. And my look at the issue would be that it's about time that the United Nations legal department would look deeper into the issue and probably bring the matter to the attention of the United Nations General Assembly, the only body which has the universal representation, which is, by the intrinsic charter and other documents of the UN, is empowered to look at these sort of issues. It's different that the legal value of these decisions within the United Nations General Assembly, they are not binding, but at least they will create the understanding of where we are and whether the United Nations membership in general, and that's the only universal organization, political, we have at this planet, can cope with some rogue state which is now sitting in the centerpiece, what is supposed to be the Security Council per se, the body which is mandated by the governments of the member states to keep international peace.
Thank you, Igor. This is very, very helpful. And connected to this, I would have two additional issues. Number one is, I would like to this is an observation I would like to just quickly confirm, that Ukraine has, apart from everything else we already discussed, Ukraine has a major advantage as the initial permanent member of the United Nations, that the Supreme Council of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic on August 22nd, which is just in a few days, we will have another anniversary, has actually ratified the Charter of the United Nations. And the Soviet Union, Supreme Soviet, has indeed ratified it on August 20th of 1945. But the Russian Federation set of issues. That's one sort of observation that I would like to hear from you. Second observation is, what can we do? Because there is a initiative group in Ukraine that is distributing a petition to be universally signed, petition to the United Nations to address these issues, right? But apart from the petitions, and again, that would be a pure speculation. However, if you would like to maybe speculate a little bit, what would be, let's say we are able to draw enough attention to the issue. Let's say we call by we, I mean Ukraine, its allies, we call a General Assembly of the United Nations on this issue. What would be the chances that Russia would be actually, I don't know, forced to just play by the rules rather than at least within the framework of the United Nations? Because obviously Russia has broken any human decency rules in this war against Ukraine and the entire civilized world. Russia has broken any rules that just exist on this planet. However, what are the chances that the General Assembly of the UN can just do something about this major injustice?
First, you mentioned non-ratification by the Russian Federation of the Charter. That's true. It's a mere fact. But that's only a minor fact of what I call the professional negligence. And you have a stockpiles of that. I mean, the whole history of the Soviet Union and more Russian Federation, I would argue, is the professional negligence on matters which are far too costly for the outer public than this outer public even may consider. And yes, it's one number on the list of negligences and sometimes even frauds. You were right in using that term in application for the Russian Federation, not for this particular case, which I explained why, but yes, fraud also could be used. But on the matter of what can be done, General Assembly is the most representative universal body representing all governments of the member states. And that is roughly the amount of about, I'm not sure about the correct figure, but it's about 200 now, almost all we have on this planet. Now, bringing the matter to the attention of the General Assembly just shows that the United Nations, as it was conceived back in mid-40s last century and organized back 1945 last century, has some major problem at the very centerpiece of what is supposed to be the crucial core, crucial universal organization for securing peace. And that is opening of the eyes, because let us not be shy about the fact. I'm Ukrainian, you're Ukrainian, we in Ukraine know what's happening daily on our territory. We know what type of enemy we are facing. Not only uncivilized in terms of codification of war, but lying constantly and abusing the power it had acquired with huge procedural mistakes at the highest international body, and it is abusing this country, this membership, to the detriment of human decency, to the detriment of the whole world. But to understand that, you should hear about that. And it's not a big secret that in the course of the last 20 years, huge amount of money had been invested by Moscow into Russian propaganda throughout the world. And distracting this propaganda, showing the real side of life, is an important political task for any responsible member of not only governments, but human society. That is why I think General Assembly is the most proper venue for facts to be brought about and to discuss the matter. United Nations today, at least its security part, is incapable of securing the largest breach of world peace since the end of World War. That's the matter, not only for us, Ukrainians. That's the matter for the whole membership.
For the entire world.
Yes.
Okay. I guess this is the first exchange of ideas, Igor, and I would like to express my deep gratitude. And I guess in our next episode, we will go deeper into both judicial, legalistic, and procedural details of what was done and what can be done. So let me say big thank you, and I hope this series of our conversations will bring about better awareness of the world about this major injustice. Thank you.
Good to see you. Thanks.
Yep.